Okay, I think I've gone on long enough, but I want to give you a sense that that question itself really can be questioned, can be deconstructed in all of its parts, and you usually come to the conclusion that there's no they out there, there's no us out there, and there's very little hatred out there. But there is anti-Americanism, and it's important to understand it and respond to it. And it's important that the US government get that message as much as people at universities. Thank you very much for listening.
Does anyone have any questions for Professor McPherson? Or do you all have?
Students who experience the anti-Americanism, were they mostly from the South? Or was it to include Californians, to include New Yorkers, or people from the Midwest?
Good question. I mean, I'm at the University of Oklahoma. Most of our students are from Oklahoma. Most of the ones who are not are from Texas. Most of our students, while they're probably a little bit on the conservative side and religious side, they don't have much of an accent, so I think it'd be hard, unless you know them really well, to know where they're from. I don't think they've necessarily experienced it directly, but they hear people comment about how bad the United States is, or that you guys are doing everything wrong in Iraq or Afghanistan or something, but they're not generally being attacked themselves. Most people around the world have enough tact to not insult them directly. But they feel insulted as Americans. I mean, one thing that happens when you travel outside the country is that you generally start feeling a greater sense of national identity. Not necessarily pride, but at least an identity. You might leave thinking, you're really an Oklahoman, but once you're in France for 4 or 5 months, you start really identifying as an American. And that's an important experience to feel. That's why I tell everyone that you should really study abroad while you're in college. It might be your last chance. And you'll probably come back feeling better about the United States in some ways. Whether you're attacked or not, you'll start feeling more in common with others around the country. And God knows this country needs more unity.
Question in the who is they section, you mentioned the most educated have the most intense pro and anti-American feelings. In the polling that was done, is there any sense of where that education took place? Which like students who came to America and studied, were they more pro-American or anti-American or vice versa?
No, I've never seen any poll that asks that. My guess, though, from just knowing a lot of Latin American leaders who have gone to the United States, is that the best way to diminish anti-Americanism is to have foreigners come and study the United States. Generally, if they haven't been shaped, it turns them around in some way. And it makes them not necessarily, well, it makes them less anti-American, it makes them appreciate the complexity of the United States much more. They know more about the problems, they know more about the great things in the United States, and they come back much more complex. Now you have people like Rafael Correa, the present president of Ecuador, who got his Ph.D. in economics at Illinois, I think. I wouldn't say he's necessarily anti-American, but he's certainly a man firmly on the left, a strong nationalist. So in that case, it doesn't seem to really change anything for him. It might have hardened him against US power in some way. But I think in most cases, it's not. There's another famous example of an educational exchange going really awry, which is Salim Couture, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He came to Colorado, I think Colorado State Teachers College, in the 50s for a couple of years. Got an education, but hated it. And he spoke very bitterly about the lasciviousness of the culture, the fact that women wore skirts and that sort of thing. He was shocked by that, went back and became rabidly anti-American, and his writings were then read by Osama bin Laden and many others. who didn't ever come to the United States. So it can turn against you, but I think generally speaking, it doesn't. I think most of the anti-Americans you see are people who go to their own universities, to the best universities in their own countries, and usually might be influenced by Europeans or something else.
Involved in an organization called the Friendship Force.
Okay.
Something Jimmy Carter started in the second administration as governor of Georgia, period into the White House. We have a number of chapters in the United States who travel abroad and study people's homes. It's an exchange, but it's not. We don't always exchange with those people. So I was in Costa Rica just recently, studying with meat factory in Costa Rica. And they were very friendly and very kind. I guess you would assume they would be if they're part of our organization. But they love us.
Yeah.
We have like 50,000 Americans there. A lot of pilots on there. And why wouldn't they? They have an army. And so we protect them more or less.
We've never invaded Costa Rica, that's true. Yeah.
They have been invaded by some other South American countries. Interesting point about Costa Rica, they have no flies and no mosquitoes and no army. What if we had no army? How much money would we all have?
Good question. Oh, this brings me actually to an interesting point. I think during the Cold War, Americans often started to panic that huge majorities around the world hated them. And that simply wasn't true. I mean, if you look at the polling, you often had sort of a net number. So they would ask people, do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of the United States? Sometimes it'd be very or little, but essentially they would add up the favorables and deduct the unfavorables. And that was your net result. And generally speaking, throughout the world, big cities in Latin America, big cities in Europe and Asia and Africa, we always had net favorables, often of 30, 40%, which means your negatives might be 30%, your positives would be 70 or 80%. Well, let's say 7%, so that adds up to 100. That was pretty typical throughout the Cold War. It went up, it went down. The only time we started having net unfavorables, the negatives, is during the Bush administration. The only time in history. And it went down significantly, where the numbers were inversed. You had negatives 30, 40%. And in places like Pakistan and Turkey, it's like you had 1% pro-American, 99% anti-American. I mean, it was bad. It was really, really negative. And it's changed significantly since Obama. But something has almost sort of shifted that you can't bring back completely those opinions. But back in the Cold War, people recognized that the Soviet Union was not a good alternative to the United States. And they saw the United States as a leader of freedom and democracy, regardless of things like Korea and Vietnam. The negatives went up during Vietnam, but it was those episodes, but there was still generally positive around the world.
You see, you're speaking of the whole world, or the South Koreans. Why wouldn't they?
Well, they have reasons why they wouldn't. I don't know if you saw when Psy, Psy is that what he's called, the South Korean singer, went to the White House. There was a bit of a controversy because a few years earlier he had sung an anti-American song, one of his hits, and so he apologized before he got to the White House. It was foolish back then, but he just did whatever was popular at the time. But it was very popular to be anti-American because we have bases there. And whenever you have bases, you have soldiers on leave, you have soldiers who rape women, get drunk, get into fights, things happen. And often they will not be tried. Americans won't let them be tried by local courts. It's a huge issue of sovereignty. Imagine if any country in the world did that in the United States of America. Had a base, had soldiers who raped 12-year-old American girls, and then would be tried by their own military courts. That'd be cause for war, not just a song, right? Which in Korea is a couple of angry songs and a couple 100,000 people protesting. So it's a different situation. Of course, they're used to it. They understand the rationale for the truce, so that tempers it. Actually, the region in the world where we are the most popular is Africa. Almost every African country, those that are polled, it's not too many, give the highest marks to the United States. And then a couple of those sort of stand dictatorships, like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, they all, usually when they have very friendly dictators to us, or we have military bases there, we also get huge numbers there. But I think in Africa, it's probably more general.
Just a quick comment on what you just said. In South Africa, I've been asked by South Africans if I could take them home in my suitcase. So yes, I see what you're saying.
Yes, you got it.
You mentioned in passing about the drone attacks in Pakistan. All I've read was spot on in terms of how unpopular they're having in Pakistan. What alternative would you suggest in terms of our objectives in that part of the world to neutralize or reverse that very palpable hatred against America?
I'm not sure there is a better alternative because I understand the rationale for using those drones is that you're directly killing leaders of Al-Qaeda or similar groups. Yes, there are probably civilians getting killed. The White House says no. Independent agencies say yes, they're in the hundreds. Of course there's civilians getting killed. They work for Al-Qaeda. They're all around there, Al-Qaeda hides among them, so you're going to kill someone. And that's been accepted as an acceptable collateral damage by the White House and CIA. What alternative there is, I think we have tried the alternatives, which is to tell Pakistanis. And usually what happens is that Pakistanis tell Al-Qaeda. It gets to them. That's why we didn't tell them about we were going after Osama bin Laden, because somebody would have leaked to Osama bin Laden. So there's a huge gap. There's huge mistrust between the US and the Pakistani government. And for good reason. The United States wouldn't be suspecting Pakistan if it hadn't been burned again and again and again. We know that the security services or some branch of the security services are informing terrorist groups. And so that's why we've come to this draconian solution of directly killing those people. But my point is not really that there's a great alternative to this. I mean, you can find maybe you can convince Pakistanis that if they get rid of the leaks, you'll go back to the old way of doing it, where you get them to kill Al-Qaeda. But Pakistani leaders don't necessarily themselves hate that you're using drones. They say that they hate that you're using drones because it makes them more popular. And it makes people forget about their problems, their complaints to the government. So they don't necessarily want you to change the policy. They simply want to say that they hate the policy. So it's a real catch-22. They actually probably want you to continue killing with drones because they want those people out of the way. So it's a real mess. Right? And of course, I'm not privy to the intelligence, and so I don't know exactly what the relationship is with Pakistan, but it's not good. To have a nuclear power like that, be so rageful at every level of society against us, it's not a good thing.
You hear more and more news reports about the increasing Chinese military strength. How does their popularity compare to ours? Especially
The popularity of China with the rest of the world?
You see about friendship with Japan and rights to certain islands in the South China Sea.
Right.
Problems in Vietnam. I just wonder how they're viewed around the world.
It depends where, but I've seen a few polls of Latin Americans, for instance. There's a great yearly poll done in Latin America by a Chilean organization called Latino Barometer, a Latin barometer. It's actually based on a European barometer. So it comes out every year around the fall if you're interested in sort of polls in Latin America. And they usually ask, what do you think of these countries? The United States is there, China, a couple other big ones, Russia, Europe. And China usually does a little bit better than the United States. So that's Latin America. There may be particular circumstances in Latin America in that the Chinese in Latin America are rapidly becoming the biggest trade partner, especially in South America. They've now become the biggest trade partner in Argentina, Brazil, a couple other big countries, Colombia, Venezuela, and so on, where they were, they were 15th 10 years ago. Now they're first, or they're second. That's a huge change. So people are buying Chinese goods, now working for Chinese corporations, working with Chinese managers, working in Chinese factories. So they understand their dependence on the Chinese, and they appreciate the Chinese. And the thing that the Chinese don't do is meddle in politics. They just don't meddle.